Kia ora, councillors. We'll call the meeting of full council on the 26th of September 2024 to order. And I will pass over to Josh for opening KARAKIA.
Tēnā tātou katoa, me nui tātou. Tūtawa mai I runga, tūtawa mai I raro. Tūtawa mai I roto, tūtawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tai ki. Whakarongo ake au ki te tangi a te manu, tui, tui, tui tui a. Tui a I runga, tui a I raro. Tui a I roto, tui a I waho. Tui a te rangi e tū nei, tui a te papa, te takoto nei. Tui a te pauherenga waka, te pauherenga tāngata. Tui a te pau o te kīngitanga, te pau o te kotahitanga e. Ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, ka puta te ira tangata ki te whai ao, ki te ao mārama, uhi, wero, nau mai te Māori, haumi e, hui e, tai ki. Tangi apa kuratia nei, rātau te hunga kua riro ki te pō. Rātau kua haungia mai ai e te kūpenga nui, te kūpenga roa, te kūpenga ataramainuku. Whai atu rā koutou ki te pītau whakarei o te wakaorangi. O te paki o matariki tērā. Whakawhiti atu rā te poho orangi nui, kei tū atu I te pai o Maumahara. Tangehia, ngā mate o te wā. Ki ngā mate huhua o tēnei tau. Tuku, ngā mihi roimata me kīrā I tō tātou nei hoa, ānaru. Ka tahi anō tāna tama kariro. Nō reira tangi, tangi, tangi. Kia tau iho mai te tauwhirotanga runga anō hoki, te pare kāhui āriki. E noho pani nei, e tangi nei, e tangi nei. Whānau atu rā ki te motu, whānui nei, ngā iwi, ngā hapu, e noho pani nei, e tangi nei, e tangi nei. Koutou rā, te hunga wairua, whai atu rā te kīngi o te kotahitanga, kia kīngi tū heitia pōtatau, te wherowhero, te tuawhetu, ki te pō. Koutou rā te kāhui o ngā whetu, haere, haere, ari atu rā. Ko rātou ki a rātou, ko tātou ki a tātou. Ko tū heitia ki te rangi, te ariki nui, kuini ngā waihono I te pō, ki te whenua, e koko ia e ara e. Kia tau iho mai te tauwhirotanga, kia tātou, kua whakakotahi nei. I runga anō hoki ngā kupu o tēnei ata, te whakatīnanatanga, tēnei mea, te kotahitanga, I raro I te tāwharautanga o te kīngitanga. Nō reira tēnā tātou. E ngā maunga whakahi e ngā wā whakairo whenua. E ngā mana, e ngā reo, kei aku whakatike tike, kei aku rangatira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. E ramai tātou katoa. Hei tāpiri atu ki ngā kōrero, I runga anō hoki I te kaupapa o tēnei wā. Kau ki atu au ki ngā kōrero o tā uki uki. Ko 1,857 te tau. Te wā ia piri kawau. Te wā ia tamihana te rauparaha. Te wā ia rātau e kimi ana I tētahi ki a tūhei kīngi. Ka tai atu tō tātou tūpuna tamihana, uremu tamihana tērā. Kia pōtatau te wherowhero. O te kia uremu tamihana e hoa, o pōtai a koe ki te pōtai o te motu. O te whakahoki a pōtatau kia uremu tamihana e hoa, kua tō te rā ki a hau. O te whakahoki a uremu tamihana kia pōtatau te wherowhero, pai ana. Ka tō te rā I te ahi ahi, ka haramai anō te rā I te ata. Mai ia pōtatau tānu atu rā ki tō tātou ariki nui, a kuini ngā waihono I te pō. Tērā o ngā kōrero e kia nei, kīngi pōtatau, kīngi o te tika. Kīngi tāwhiao, kīngi o te maungarongo. Ki ingi mahuta, ki ingi te rangi Māori. Ki ingi te rata o te taupuke whakamārire, te tāpenakara, te whakaoranga o tā te atua I pai ai. Ko ki ingi koroki, te mana motu hake o ngā waka katoa o te motu. Ko te ariki nui kuini ngā, kuini te atairangi kāhu a te ao katoa. O ki ingi tūheitia, ki ingi o te mana Māori motu hake, te mana, ko te ki ingi o te kotahitanga no hoki. Whānau atu rā ki tō tātou ariki nui kuini ngā waihono I te pō, ka tū, ka tū, ka tū hei kuini, ka tū, ka tū, ka tū hei kuini Māori. Ka ti ake rā, e mihi kauana tēnei ki a tātou katoa ko whakarawika mai nei, I raro I te korowai, kotahi. Nō reira tēnā koutou, mauri ora ki a tātou katoa. I tā pua te pua ke mei te mauri o te aha e ngā kiki hei kua whakanaro I te pōri I te pōri I o te atu e ngā ka o ati here ana I te ra e kua te Te tia mana, tēnā koe. Ngā kai kaunihera, tēnā koutou. Ngā kai mahi o te kaunihera arohe o Waikato, tēnā tātou. Kei ngā manuhiri, ka tahi anō, ka tai mai, tēnā anō hoki koutou, nō reira tēnā tātou katoa. I want to take this opportunity to express the passing of late Kiingi Tuheitia and take this opportunity to share some insight from the team here about what we may anticipate in terms of the leadership of our newly ascended Queen, Te Ariki Nui Kuini Ngā Waihono I te pō. I didn't have an opportunity to memorise this part, but I nui ho tēnei. Anei. Te Ariki Nui Kuini Ngā Waihono I te pō, age 27, ascends the throne with a firm grounding in both te ao Māori and modern academia. With a bachelor's degree from the University of Waikato and a master's in tikanga Māori, her background reflects her deep understanding of Māori culture and values. She serves on several boards, including Te Kohanga Reo National Trust, Waitangi National Trust Board, and the University of Waikato Council, where she has championed education and the revitalisation of te reo Māori. Her long-standing involvement in kapahaka further highlights her dedication to Māori traditions and the Māori arts. Te Ariki Nui Kuini Ngā Waihono I te pō is expected to guide her reign with a focus on preserving cultural heritage, while also addressing the evolving challenges faced by Māori in contemporary society. It's anticipated that her leadership will be shaped by an emphasis of kaitiakitanga, guardianship, environmental stewardship, and fostering unity among iwi and hapu. She is known for her advocacy for rangatahi, encouraging youth leadership and ensuring their voices are central in shaping the future of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Her reign will Her reign will combine traditional leadership and modern approach, balancing Māori frameworks and collaboration with wider Aotearoa New Zealand. The values of manaakitanga, hospitality and kindness, and rangatiratanga, leadership, will guide her efforts to empower Māori communities while promoting inclusiveness and rangatahi participation. Nō reire te whānau, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Kia ora tātou katoa. Hei aku.
Kia ora.
Kia ora rā.
Kia ora, Josh. Thank you very much for that. We've had a somewhat different opening to our usual council meeting, and really it is to acknowledge the passing of Kingi Tuatea and the ascension of Te Ariki Nui Kuini Nawai. Hono i te po. It was a real privilege to represent this council alongside councilors, management and staff at the Tangihanga, and I appreciate those who chose to take up the opportunity to show their respects. We recognize the immense efforts, the logistics, the organization that went into the week of the Tangihanga, and we also acknowledge the importance of the Kingitanga to the Waikato. It is deeply significant, and we wanted to mark that today at our council meeting. Can I also acknowledge the work of Director Brent Sinclair's regulatory team and Director Greg Ryan's maritime team for their support on the Awa during the Tangihanga, and also thanks to Director Phil King's transport team for organizing Tuhuia to assist with the transport of Kamatua and Kuia between Turangawaiwai and the Taupirimanga. So finally, thank you for the attendees, for your recognition, support then and also today. Kia ora. All right, with that, we will move forward. Thank you to the Waiata crew. Much appreciated. Beautiful way to start the day. All right. Okay, councilors, we've got a fair few things on the agenda today, some of significance and have been part of a number of conversations, both within council and also throughout our community. So we will give our due attention to those. We'll work through our initial housekeeping first. We've got our health and safety statement, which is on page 5 of your agenda. Seeing as we have visitors in attendance, I might just get you to run through that, Dave.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you for attending today. In the event of an emergency, please simply follow the directions of staff. The nearest fire exit, should we require it, is through the main chamber door and out to your right onto the footpath. We'll then cross the road at the crossing and assemble in the park. If you require any assistance, please let a member of staff know.
Kia ora. All right. Do we have any apologies today? I believe we've got, just for those online in the chambers, we have myself, Councillor Hodge, Councillor Smith, Councillor Dunbar-Smith, Councillor Strange, Councillor Kneebone, Councillor Nicol, Councillor Downard, Cookson, Marr, and Councillor Hughes, and online we have Councillor Graff. And also Deputy Chair Clarkson online as well. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so we don't have any other apologies. We'll go to confirmation of the agenda. Do I have a mover, Councillor Nicol, and a second, Councillor Strange? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Disclosures of interest. I think I'm just waiting for Councillor Kneebone to re-enter the chamber. Councillor Kneebone, we're just on disclosures of interest.
Yeah, I'm related to Doug Wilson, just to disclose that. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Thank you for that. All right, so we'll note that, Dave. Okay, we'll move on to confirmation of the minutes. So we have the minutes from the council meeting of the 29th of August, 2024. Do I have a mover that those are true and correct? Councillor Hughes, and a second, Councillor Cookson. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We then have a motion to, are we confirming all of those? Oh, we're confirming the Finance and Services Committee from the 27th of August, the Environmental Performance Committee from the 14th of August, and we are receiving the Regional Transport Committee minutes from the 6th of September. I have a mover, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Marr. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, councilors, we are going to move straight to item 7.5 on your agenda. This is on page 96. We're moving to this first up because we do have visitors that are speaking to this item. So again, this is on page 96 of your agenda pack. We've got Karen Bennett, but Chris, I will hand over to you to introduce this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillors, I just wanted to just take the opportunity at the start of this paper to say what we're seeking from here is an indication of what you'd like staff to do so that we can come back to you in the annual plan. It's not about a final decision as such as what the total commitment is that will be made through the annual plan process. Should you wish to fund anything that's over and above the status quo. But that's the key thing we're looking for today. And there's another recommendation asking for some money to do a little bit of extra work. But I'll pass over to Karen to lead the paper out. I do note we do have visitors here, and there had been a request that you'd like to hear on one of the options that you're aware of, that directly from those who have put the suggestion together, as opposed to having staff represent it on their behalf.
Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Atamarie councillors, and welcome to our visitors today. Dave, if you move the slide along, please, we can just have a quick look at what we're going to talk about in this presentation. We'll have a quick recap of how we arrived at this presentation today, and we'll cover the role of council in economic development, because I know there have been some questions and there's a lot of interest in that. We'll look at the stakeholder views, and then we'll go into the potential options. And those options are, as in your paper, status quo, which is the current state where there is no funding except the work we are already doing as part of the local government contribution to the region. There's the proposed council-controlled organisation, and we have Doug Wilson of Deloitte and David Wilson, no relation, I believe, of Cities and Regions New Zealand, to present that on behalf of a business interest in Hamilton. And then there's a regional partnership option, which echoes the Regional Deals Leadership Partnership as set out in the strategic framework released by the government last month. The decisions required are, as the Chief Executive alluded to, we're seeking direction from you, Council, on your preferred option so we can go away and do the analysis, financial workup, and bring it back for your consideration through the business casing for the annual plan. There is also a request for a one-off fund so we can continue this work, but also support regional economic development in the region because there is a desire for some evidence to help us get clear our strategy, the operationalizing of this work, and the allocation of who does what, when, where, and how. And from that, we can then measure outcomes better. So I can give you more detail about that later. So next slide, please, Dave. So very briefly, you will recall that through the long-term plan process, Waikato Regional Council proposed to continue funding our Regional Economic Development Agency, Te Waka, to the tune of $750,000 a year. That went out in a consultation document, and 68% of submitters responded that they preferred we stop funding Te Waka. 31% felt that there was a potentially valuable regional economic development function to be fulfilled and requested that we continue funding. However, before Council made its decision on the funding, the agency announced publicly it did not have mandate from local government, businesses, and iwi, the freedom to operate on a long horizon work plan, and sufficient funding. It announced, therefore, it was stopping operations as an independent agency from the 30th of June 2024. This council removed the proposed funding from the budget and instructed staff to continue working with stakeholders, reporting back to this meeting in September. Thank you, Dave. So just to get shared view of the role of councils in economic development, the OECD and other international research emphasizes the importance of regional development for both national and regional economies. And it also points to the importance of local government in delivering on those economic development aspirations. And these 6 priorities for economic development actually came out of some work Burl did in 2010. The views of leadership, spatial planning and infrastructure, regulation, effective coordination and delivery of key council activities that support the effective functioning of local communities, and also supporting well-being in our social and wider community lives. Business and industry development. These are all aspects that when we spoke with our stakeholders, they agreed that this council did have a role in, and some of these to a greater or lesser extent. Next slide, please, Dave. Coming forward to 2024 and this government's view of local, regional councils and economic development, you'll be aware that the government is proposing legislative change to the Local Government Act, which will change the purpose of local government. And that is to provide for good quality local infrastructure, public services, and regulatory functions in a way that is most cost effective for households and businesses, while supporting local economic growth and development. That emphasis is an addition that has been put in for the proposed change to legislation. Also, through the Regional Deals Framework, the role of councils in unlocking economic opportunities through regional deals partnerships is recognised, and those objectives being economic growth, connected and resilient infrastructure, and the supply of affordable and quality housing. Secondary objectives are regional and private sector collaboration, improved decision-making and funding, collaborative ways of working, and resilient and sustainable communities. All aspects of the way this council works and has been for many years. Next slide, please, Dave. So to the task that you set staff, you asked us to work with stakeholders to understand what they needed. What does the region need to be successful? What works, what doesn't? What are the areas of focus? What are the functions, roles, and responsibilities of the various actors in our region, including specifically what's the role of the regional council? How do we add value? And there was a lot of conversation about leadership and mandate. And that is, in fact, a really important part of this ongoing conversation. From May to September, we have spoken with people from across our whole region, and have had a good representation from every district, every area. But we wouldn't go so far as to say it was necessarily representative of every part of our region. Next slide, please, Dave. Now, we provided the analysis of the stakeholder views in your agenda pack, so I won't reprise it here. You'll find those from page 106 on your agenda. But sufficient to say, we had an online survey that ran from 10th of July to the 5th of August with a good response, 201, 51% from business, 15% from not-for-profit organisations, and 9% from local government. And we sought people's views on how do we align? What do we align around? How do we find that agreement and collaboration? And so we sought feedback on the key functions of regional economic development, and you can see their feedback is there, with 64% identifying business growth and development as their number one preferred focus. Next slide, please, Dave. We then had more than 50 face-to-face discussions. Some of these discussions were just an hour, others were longer. People were extraordinarily generous. And I think I've commented to many people, we have so many committed, knowledgeable, really involved people in this region. And there's a depth in this community that we can tap into and leverage and work with. The discussions actually were far and wide in their reflections. We understood from them the reasons why they believed that previous approaches have not worked. The different needs and perspectives of our communities came through. There was a lot of talk about the difficulty of separating economic development from the wider issues of community sustainability and other elements of well-being. And so just because it's consistent with our own purpose, it's that sustainable model of we are dependent on the environment. We need a healthy, engaged, functioning community to drive a strong economy. There was a really ongoing theme came through about the distinctive functional economic areas and the important connections between economic and labour markets and connections to other regions. And that then linked in to the criticality of spatial planning to enable the region's economic and community development. Next slide, please. So when we sought perhaps greater pointiness about the role of WRC, it came down to facilitation, connection, collaboration, alignment. So up there, you'll see what we heard most commonly: facilitating alignment of activities and investment, advocating for regionally significant infrastructure, continuing that regional consenting role, so important to providing regulatory certainty through policy as well, leading the development of a regional spatial plan, cross-sector, cross-regional collaboration, and then the provision of virtual front door to the region, coordinating with others, though, to engage central government, trade delegations, and investors. Not necessarily the doing, the coordinating and facilitating. And then the area, again, of Waikato Regional Council's strength, the provision and coordination of information. And I know that a lot of people online and some behind us have said, we really need you to tool up to really invest in digital and, data and analysis. The feedback. Next slide, please, Dave. So what institutional arrangement might we consider, given that economic development arrangements will be completely idiosyncratic to our region? So we do need to tailor-make this to what our stakeholders need, what we understand of our region, and where we can expand and grow and develop. We have three options. We have the status quo, That's ad hoc coordination, no visible front door for offshore investors or government, and that would include no further WRC funding outside what we're already doing for spatial planning and other aspects of our business that contribute to regional economic development. We have the council-controlled organisation proposal from David and Doug. They'll share that with us soon. This is modelled on the Northland model, which councillors have previously expressed an interest in. And as you know, David came to speak to us about his experience of establishing the Northland model. So I'm taking it, the paper is very much based on that model that he's developed previously. And then we'll look at the Regional Leadership Partnership, which is the nascent approach to regional deals, but looks at empowering and enabling people who are already doing the business, and WRC providing that coordinating and alignment role. There would be some funding required, but that is why we need to go away and do a business case and bring it back for the annual plan. Before I invite David and Doug to come and talk to us about the CCO, we probably just need to have a quick review of what's involved in a CCO. So under the Local Government Act, a CCO would be constituted. In 2015, the Office of the Auditor General published a report into the benefits and disadvantages of a CCO. And I'll just quickly give you those two different views. The possible benefits of your CCO: improved commercial focus and separation from the political direction. Less process in making decisions than the local authority processes. Potentially economies of scale where we're serving a number of councils. And the ability to recruit and retain high quality professional board members and staff. The possible disadvantages of a CCO, that's the council's lack of direct accountability to your ratepayers and stakeholders for the services the CCO delivers. Often there has been experienced tensions between the objectives of the CCO and the outcomes sought by the community. And you see this played out in Auckland with Mayor Wayne Brown's continuing frustration espoused in the paper about the CCOs there, for example. There are additional ongoing costs. You've got the initial establishment costs of a CCO, but also the monitoring that would be ongoing in local council. And also a CCO will have overhead and ongoing costs. They have to run as a business. And then reduced ability to manage risk, because council is seen as being accountable, but actually might not necessarily have much ability to manage any risks. So considering cost effectiveness is an important part of any further work that has to happen. That's required by a 2014 amendment to the Local Government Act. So there would have to be a deep dive into the cost effectiveness of a CCO if that is your preference. Council can also consider retaining all aspects of service delivery, or it can delegate responsibility for governance and funding to a joint committee or other shared governance arrangement. And that is probably where you'd be looking for your option 3 about how the governance would evolve. So on that note, it's timely to move on to talk about the council-controlled organisation proposal and invite Doug Wilson and David Wilson to the table. Thank you. Yeah.
Just in terms of the CCO, Karen, it's still reliant on this council's annual plan and long-term plan decision-making to ensure it's funded adequately, whatever that might be.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the same ongoing discussions that we've had to date would continue. Thank you.
T. Walker, previous.
No. Well, I don't know. Ask them. Forgive me.
We'll ask Doug and David to come forward and we've got seats there for you to present your proposal. So councillors, we've indicated that Doug and David have about 15 minutes to present, and then we'll open it up for councillors to ask further questions. Kia ora.
Thank you. Just firstly, I wanted to acknowledge Dallas Fisher's absence today. Unfortunately, he had a medical appointment that he had to attend. He said he's here in spirit, so just in case you're wondering where he is. Just by way of some opening remarks, look, obviously we would see it collectively that Waikato is an extremely important compositional part of New Zealand's economic future. You know, we've got a long held history around our primary sector advantage, supporting secondary industry with developing tertiary and service sectors. We've got a strong regional profile for exports and can continue to contribute to a national export drive. However, this position is starting to slide. We've got a tactical advantage, coined the Golden Triangle, which has real momentum and has the emergence of the northern and eastern corridors. And when you consider that 47% of New Zealand's population sit within our three regions, Auckland, Bay of Plenty and Waikato. However, Waikato, like the rest of New Zealand, has an infrastructure deficit, hampering our economic development across the region. To date, our regional economic development efforts have largely been siloed and operate in a vulnerable economic development ecosystem, which is leading to a lack of regional trust, collaboration, duplicated effort. There are inter-regional efforts that are sporadic at best, that Golden Triangle concept. The regional inward investment propositions that are localised and opportunistic, and a lack of a common unified voice on regional priorities. And as a result, we do not perform well with central government. And we have received a disproportionately or proportionally lower amount of inward investment as a consequence. We believe a regional economic development organisation that accepts and learns from previous failures, is well designed and sustainably funded, and has a long-term planning approach and is outcomes focused, can address these opportunities and challenges. If we just move to the next slide, please. As Karen has mentioned, under the new National's Infrastructure for the Future plan, there's three critical points that emerge from our perspective. They're moving to a 30-year approach to planning, which is really important and critical. We understand they're seeking cross-party agreement that future incoming governments can't materially change that plan to avoid unnecessary cost and wasted resource. With that in mind, we have very little regional credibility to ensure we are aligned on our future regional infrastructural needs to engage with this agency. The danger is our regional future in terms of infrastructure will be imposed on us unless we put up a credible face to represent our region and voice. I'll just hand across, well, just before I hand across to David, I'll just make a couple of points on the keys, the 5 points here. Points 1 and 2 is where we really are underrepresented. We are referred to our disproportionate amount of inward funding from central government because we're not organised. We don't have a conjoined view, regional view of our macro infrastructural needs and spatial needs. And therefore the inward investment and coordination of that and the amount of that is underrepresented and underdelivered in our region. That's the key point we would make. Point 3, in terms of national and city and regional deals, we've done okay. But that's where I reference we've done that on an opportunistic and a siloed approach. We haven't been coordinated in that area. And then my reference is around the 30-year infrastructure pipeline. We must have a 30-year view to match up against that and be aligned to that and have a clear voice back to central government to ensure. Otherwise, we'll have central government's view of what our region needs rather than our regional view on that. I'll just hand across now to David to discuss some of the key themes that have come out of our initial work to date.
Next slide, please. Who's running the slides?
Can I just get you also to
Thank
move
you.
the mics just a little bit closer, just to make sure that our counselors that are online can clearly hear you? And also, during your presentation, if you wanted to address the question that came through around any connection between yourselves and Tawaka, that would be helpful.
Okay, so my declaration of interest would be, I did a couple of consulting jobs for Tawaka on infrastructure projects. This is an interesting slide. We didn't just look at Northland Inc., I've got to say. My background is, 20 years in this space and used international research. My doctorate was on governance and economic development in regions. So have also a lot of background in terms of what happens overseas and internationally around organisations such as this. The common theme always seems to be that many strands make a strong rope. That if you want a harakeke kite that's going to hold the putia, you need to bring those things together just like you have your weaving on the side of the wall here. That's what's missing in the Waikato at the moment. At a regional level, I'm sure at local levels and at other levels, maybe within Papua New Guinea, it's a different story. But from a regional perspective, for regional economic development, that's the missing ingredient. You'll see some very interesting insights on the left-hand side. I'll just draw your attention to the right-hand side graph where you can look at the blue, which is outside or external funding coming in to help the operations of regional economic development organisations in other areas. Where they see capability, where they see capacity and ability to implement, the central government funding comes in. Tawaka's on the right-hand side. I think that tells you everything that you need to know around the confidence that central government and other inward investment actors had with the organisation. Now, I'm not saying that it lacked capability, the opposite. What it lacked was capacity. Speaking to others that have given us insights as to their successes and some failures, of course, with these types of organisations, the common themes on the left-hand side come up. It's got to be representative, it's got to be inclusive, and it's got to focus, as Karen said, on the nature of the region. And I would go a little further and say the structure of your economy in the region is absolutely vital in that perspective, because you're actually trying to affect change, to increase productivity, to get yourselves higher paying jobs. And how do you do that? Well, all hands to the pump. It's outcome led. So there's a very good, strong weave coming through some of the more successful regional development agencies where they're aligning their efforts to the outcomes through long-term planning and spatial planning. So it's outcomes led and outcomes based. And how you count that performance is around delivery of those long-term outcomes, but benchmarked along the way with expectations, yearly business plans. So there are ways that we can actually address large outcomes through these types of organisations. These outcomes then become more agreed rather than off on their own tangent in some cases. The other thing is that you can see that these organisations are honest brokers and they're catalysts for development, both within the public sector and the private sector, and with increasing confidence and partnership with Māori right across the country. So bringing those groups together makes a huge difference in terms of the outcomes for those regional economies. And the bottom point is that essentially, an organisation such as this has to be market-led. It has to understand what's happening in the regional economy, the national economy, and internationally in terms of competitiveness for your own sectors. So absolutely fundamental. So really good insights coming from these guys. These are CEOs from these organisations, the three on the left that we had good discussions with around What does success look like? Just hand back to Doug for the next slide. Thank you.
Just to talk to the Te Waka element, apart from attending the two-day hui prior to its formation and being engaged to do a couple of engagements for Te Waka, I've had no direct involvement with the Te Waka organisation at all. Really, sorry, if we could, sorry, might have got
My mistake. This is my slide. Okay. Given the insights that we've gotten and the research we've done, we've put up a straw man. And here it is on the slide in one picture. So we've looked at the funding options on the left-hand side, and we looked at the stakeholders that would need to be engaged in how you would run or manage an organisation such as this. We've marked out some terms in terms of what it looks like and what it does. At this point, we're thinking CCO, but we can discuss this. There are different models, but in New Zealand, that seems to be the one that works the best when all people come together. What its role will be in this space, as you can see, sometimes in terms of being an investor, facilitator, promoter, but have to be an honest broker. And as my best friend, who's world-renowned regional development advisor, Professor Greg Clark, says, the 3 rules of economic development are implementation, implementation, and implementation. That's the first one, delivery. You need an organisation that has the freedom to deliver long-term programs and report on them as you go. The focus has come from work that you've already done. This is a question. You may be re-looking at your strategy, but whatever the focus of the regional strategy is in terms of economic development, you would expect this organisation to take its lead from that, and you would have a way of describing what those outcomes are that you would like them to work on and how they're going to work on it, and give us the business plan for next year and give us the benchmarks for it. So very much far more aligned than perhaps we may have been in the past. 20 years ago, you wouldn't have had this level of sophistication. And readers know that local government are very good at spatial planning. This is good. There needs to be an economic development overlay as well, and there needs to be some feed into that process around what the private sector is looking for in terms of the spatial planning. So should be helpful in that process. Okay, now your turn, Doug.
Thanks, David. Yeah, next slide, thanks. I'm going to focus on the right-hand side here in terms of the next part of the discussion, and I'll let David explain by way of an example how you get that measurable return on investment in terms of Aredo and what it's meant to deliver. What I would say just first, and we'll re-emphasise this point in our wrap-up, is that what we're not looking to do, or what we've been told from the discussions we've had to date, and I think it's come through in your discussions, Karen, is building something that is not different from what we've had before. Clearly, it wasn't successful. It was stating the obvious. It no longer exists, so it was flawed. One of the key elements we think that was missing was around that sustainable funding. This type of model, whether it's option 2 or option 3, needs to be funded for 30 years from a 30-year perspective, and have the right level of funding to be successful. We think that was a key failing of the previous models, was the lack of sustainable funding and the right level of funding for this organisation to be successful. You only get out what you put in. And I think what we put in was not enough for that organisation to deliver what was expected of it. So a key part of our next work would be understanding what is required to be successful for this organisation, and what is that cost, and how do we fund it, and fund it for a sustainable period. And we think it has to be a 30-year perspective in line with central government's approach and general thought around long-term planning for infrastructure as a key focus point. The other element is that collaboration piece to build a strong regional voice. There are many stakeholders and parties, organisations who have vested interest in the outcomes or delivery of what this organisation delivers. It needs to have a strong regional voice to represent the region. Again, reiterating a point I made earlier, the feedback we get from the Royal We, I hear, I know David hears, and I've talked to others who hear the same thing. We go down to central government in a siloed approach, not from a regional perspective, a bit of a generalisation possibly, but they do not welcome that approach. We're seen as disjointed. We don't have a strategic perspective on the region, and we get what we're given accordingly. So a key fundamental of this organisation, it needs to be seen as different to what currently exists, i.e. accretive for the region in terms of a mandate to speak on behalf of the region in this area. And so that comes down to the design and capabilities that it has and the funding to deliver that to ensure it has the strongest chance of success. I'll hand back to David to talk more about the KPI outcome element.
Yeah, next slide, please. I won't go through this slide slavishly. Karen's research pointed out a few things that are important that the responses said in terms of what they want from economic development. Those were business and industry development, inward investment, strategy and political representation, what Doug was just talking about, and infrastructure. Those seem to be the priorities in terms of the people that you've spoken to through your survey. But I'll just bring this to you at the top there, which is an example really of outcomes-based planning and work. So this was from Venture Taranaki, and it was a comment that came from Calvin, who, by the way, was strategy manager for New Plymouth District Council before he became CEO of the EDA, and he was always vexed by this problem where the alignment was not there between long-term planning in the council, other strategies across the region, say housing, and what they're trying to deliver in terms of the EDAs. The EDA was sort of doing what it thought was right from a sectoral point of view. So here's an example of his outcomes-based project called Branching Out. And he said to me, we're 4 years into a 10-year food and fibre plan called Branching Out, which has returned 70 million in private sector investment and 600 jobs so far. We figure we've got about another 6 years before we need to exit. That's the catalytic role you want. So immediately attracting inward investment from the private sector because they see the future for themselves, but there is also public interest and public benefit from doing this, from strengthening that sector, whatever it may be. And I think this is the hallmark of what you want to try and achieve in any next step. Okay, next slide, please. So Karen mentioned the leadership group that you're talking about in option 3, and then said that perhaps this might be relevant in terms of this model, and yes, it may. At the top there, I've put what I would have called as a running title, a Regional Economic Development Forum. So who's at that level? We want key regional stakeholders, WRC, TLAs, iwi, business leaders on that forum. Now, these people may not be the doers. You as a group, as Karen said, may decide to join with other TLAs to have a group that decides who goes on this forum, or you may have representation yourself. But the idea is that you will then choose the organisation's commercial board and provide the letter of expectation and have oversight of the regional economic development strategy and integration and collaboration with aligned or allied strategies. So it's operating at that high level, regional, strategic level. Now, the organisation itself is formed out of this. And it's that weaving. It's bringing the kite together so that you can hold the kaupapa in one place for the region. It has political implications, but also strategic. The next level down your Rito board, you really want those people that can deliver and have the networks and relationships to enable the delivery of the program of work. So specifically designed to be those people that have excellence or experience or understanding of the sectors that they may be working in, or the long game, which may be an increase in export revenue per regional GDP, whatever the outcome happens to be. And underneath that, you want an organisation that is capable of delivering those long-term outcomes. Now, you can see how the reporting just goes straight back up through that loop. You would expect the Rito board to be reporting to the forum on regular occurrences. So we've tried to give you a framework that we believe may offer the opportunity of bringing iwi, TLAs, regional council and business leaders together in a focused leadership group that enables the kaupapa for the organisation below it.
But I thank you for that, Doug and David. Councillors, questions? Councillor Hughes.
Thanks, Panel Chair. Yeah, thanks for your presentation. That was, yeah, good. And I don't think there's any surprises in there for anybody sitting around the tables. We've certainly discussed this. The issue I have, and it's one that I raised with Dallas a while ago, and that's in relation to the funding model and the reliance on Waikato Regional Council. The investment fund is ratepayers' money. It's not our money. The income that comes from that is ratepayers' money. And therefore, it forces us to go out to consultation. And they have, you know, the consultation results were 2/3, 1/3 against. So we need to present, if we're going to be successful in getting some of that money over the line, we need to be able to present something which is credible and is going to deliver. I totally agree we need the need for an economic development agency, and it must be across the region, otherwise we're wasting our time and money. And therein lies the challenge, and how we can deliver that, I don't know. But I don't believe, and I've spoken to people in Priority 1 in Northland, there is a big pool of money in the Waikato which is going into sectors of the organisations like Tourism Waikato, and Taupo's got their own, which is separate. There's big pools of money going out there already. And until that's pulled together and we have a collaborative model which works across the region, we're going to really struggle. Now, I don't know how much it costs to do that, but I would suggest that that has to be the number one focus, any new organisation, and then you've got something to sell to the region. The other issue I would like to see included in the model is a subscription type funding arrangement from corporates. I know it works in Priority 1. I've got that to a degree up north. But the Northland funding model is different with respect, David, because they've got 450 million or close to invested. That produces a lot more money than what we've got, and we've got a much bigger region, a lot more people. So in relative sense, there is quite a disparity between those two. So look, I'm not being negative. I'm just trying to identify how can we get over the next hurdle, which you've identified as being the funding, and to rely on regional council for that, I think is probably unrealistic at this stage. So
I'll address that. It's a very good line of discussion and question, actually, and it's the heart of the matter. Our view is the first step is actually understanding what is the true, what should the true cost be, and you've got to take a bottom-up approach and say what type of organisation do we need to build to be successful. Start from that perspective, and then what is the cost? That'll help you understand the funding gap that could exist and likely to exist, and then how do we bridge that funding gap? We've got a clear view that it shouldn't be the burden of regional council to fully fund that model. It's not the only benefactor of the outcomes from what are achieved through this type of organisation. And so we'd like to take the time to actually do some detailed modelling after understanding the cost structure that should be put in place to look at those bridging the funding gap. For example, I think one of the pieces of work we'd like to go more deeper into is some form of business levy around this. Business is a key beneficiary of this organisation, and it should have some skin in the game, if it wants a voice at the table as well. So I think one of the ones we'd like to explore out is how that could be constructed in a way to bridge that funding gap. I think the third critical element, and this is born out of our work to date, is that if you build it, the central funding comes. That's the key plank we're missing as well. The other successful REDOs, which are sustainably funded, have attracted central government funding to do project-based work to significant degrees to prove out some of those business cases as outcome-focused approaches. Central government, private, and a REDO-based funded approach to look at key initiatives around regional economic development. That's the bit we're missing out on. But the government will not give us any good, any material funding with regard to that unless we're organised and seen as being organised.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. And firstly, can I publicly thank Dallas for taking the initiative to get the likes of yourselves involved and to progress this where there's something meaningful and tangible before us. So really do appreciate Dallas's input and your time. So thank you to start with that. Just forgive my voice, it's for some reason a bit croaky this morning. I'm concerned because I was a councillor, I think 17 years now, and the inception of Te Waka and Dallas led that. And I think touching on something Chris just said, the Te Waka was rejected. Economic development wasn't rejected. I think I certainly have a desire, and I think collectively we and many across the region want to see a regional economic development organisation of some sort, whether it's either of option 2 or 3. I know from prior experience that when the mayors of Hamilton, Waipa and Waikato went down to Wellington to see Annette King about the expressway, she told them to get out of the room and come back when they had a unified voice. And that was the start of Future-Proof. Future-Proof seems to be an organisation of haves and have-nots. The haves being the 3 that started it, have progressed and have gone way beyond its inception. Whereas I see other councils, mayors, a chip on their shoulder, and I'll be open about it and I can have that discussion with any of them. We have a divided region because some resent the regional council, some resent the Future-Proof organisation, and we have a stumbling block amongst ourselves. My question probably surrounds how do we take the personalities out of this for the benefit of the region and therefore challenge. And at this stage, I'm open-minded about the 2 options, 2 or 3. I'm not a great fan of spending $100,000 on it. We can get into that later, but there's a hell of a lot of information that's contained here and known already. So I just wonder, is any comment you could put in from experience as to how we could take either option 2 or 3 forward to gain traction, particularly with local government? I think the business community would be far more minded. Although if you read the report which you have, Karen's made the comment, there's quite a number who say they don't want an organisation, which I think is now short-sighted. So I'll hopefully throw in a question on there rather than making a statement. But the reality for me is this has to succeed, but how can we get it to get past the personalities?
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Well, I think we probably agree with most of what you said. We got a little statement on that slide there at the bottom. The Waikato has complex and multifaceted political and economic dynamics. That sounds like an understatement. But quite a coherent economic geography at a regional level, and I know also sub-regional levels. But those things are not separate. They're not different. They're complementary. they're not a problem. So future-proof is not a problem. It's doing a good thing for that sub-region, and it's absolutely right to be doing that. It's not an economic development project. It's it's an infrastructure project. That's another discussion. But I think that forum, it took us a long time to get to this, and I've seen it work in other places, is there so that you reduce those risks around transparency and accountability, so that you can see right into the organisation straight away because you actually frame it and form it. And the other part of that is they say the success in terms of regional economic development governance is the ability to have horizontal integration and vertical integration. So horizontally across the region, TLAs, WRC, iwi, business, stakeholders coming together. You can have community groups coming together into this too, leading community organisations if it becomes a community outcome that you're actually trying to achieve, such as health. However, and so if you get that, then you start to get the horizontal integration as well, and you need to work on that. And that is upwards to central government, priority one, sorry for the slip there, and below that down to your community level, iwi hapu level. So that's really vital, and that's why we suggest this forum, which is slightly different from most of the other CCOs. So I think it will reduce those concerns around transparency, accountability and duplication, because it will be clear at a strategic level at the top what this organisation is doing.
Just to add to that quickly, I think at the next level down, it's critical to get that broad construct right. What I mean by that is what I've seen, where we see the biggest failure is where you've got board representatives of stakeholders. That creates a politically problematic situation. The models that I've been involved in creating, when I'm with Dallas, interestingly, is where stakeholders get input into board selection. That's where they have a voice around the governance selection, but the selection process is independent and based on the skills required for governance. So there's no political appointments to the board at all, but the key stakeholders do have a seat at the table to select that board or that governing board on a skills basis. I think that's critical to depoliticise it, but make sure stakeholders have some input into that governance structure.
Okay, and just mentioning to councillors, obviously, this is a time to ask Doug and David specific questions about their proposals. We will have time beyond this presentation to go into the other aspects of the report. So just wanting to flag that. Councillor Dunbar-Smith.
Yeah, specifically you, Doug. You've talked about the importance of a regional voice to attract central government funding and on a 30-year timeframe. One of the issues we found is that when Te Waka folded, many of the TAs also withdrew their funding and took it back into tourism or something else. They've been key partners in providing this funding. We've had Te Waka for many years now. It obviously did manage to get government funding under the PGF funding or support that, but what is the key difference between what you're proposing and what was there, given that we used to have a regional voice nominally? How is this different? Why will it work better?
I think it comes down to, and it sits at the very top, there's a lot of work to still to come to in the business case and the detail, and the devil in the detail around this. But Ved said very high level, we went cap in hand and said, how much money have we got to put into this thing? And then we constructed the organisation off that model. As a consequence, it was under-powered and under-resourced with the right capabilities. And so it failed to be seen as accretive to what already existed. And so I think in terms of business or TAs, they said, what are you doing differently that we're not doing already? It couldn't prove that it had an accretive element to it. We think the business case has got to prove that it has a point of difference to what already exists and is accretive to that and can bring the other pieces along to the table to create that strong regional voice. And I think there's definitely a piece of work in the detail to figure out what level of expertise and competencies that will demonstrate that to other stakeholders in the region, such that they give it the mandate to have that regional voice. That's what I think the key fundamental difference was. And that sits around the funding model of it and also, therefore, the capability that existed. It was set to fail.
So effectively what you're saying is the 750K that was there wasn't sufficient to give Te Waka what it needed.
Look, absolutely. You can see clearly just from the case studies we showed, we were grossly underfunded just by 3 comparators. I'm not saying they've got the right, we've got to do the work ourselves to say what do we need as a region by way of resource capability and capacity to deliver our outcomes. But you can see it's going to take more than what was put in place initially.
Right. And so you're suggesting that's primarily driven through a regional council rate, given that the TAs often haven't put the funding forward, and that also there's a rating on businesses.
Yes.
Possibly 3-4 million, whatever it is. There's some kind of fund that you're looking at.
Yeah, we would do the work to see what is the total cost of this organisation to be successful, as I mentioned. What have we got in available to us now? What's the funding gap? Where would the difference come from? We think a levy, a business levy, would be a key part of building that bridging that gap.
And that would have to be brought in at an annual plan and then reinforced at a LTP process, because you're talking 30 years. You're talking a long term.
Has to be, if you're not prepared to fund it for 30 years, part of the challenge with Te Waka, it had a 3-year funding runway. So how are you expected to attract talent when why would they uplift or bring their skills to our region to work in Te Waka when they thought they might not be around, and it might not be around in 3 years?
Right. Thank you.
But 3 years is the nature of council funding. So even as a CCO,
it's got to have a longer, just like central government's decided, the infrastructure agency, it's got to have a 30-year vision, and we've got to have the same approach.
so vision, 30-year vision, I get that. But a 30-year funding horizon,
Certainly,
if it's funded from a regional council, how do you overcome the limitations?
Look, I guess it's a 30-year, proposal view, and then it can be broken back incrementally to align with, regional LTPs, etc.
Got it. All right. I've got Councillor Nicol, Marr, Kneebone, and then Cookson. Councillor Nicol.
Thank you for that. And yeah, I recall, we made the decision last triennium for a 3-year term to uplift. So we forced ourselves into doing another consultation rather than deciding the 10-year. But the announcement from Te Waka to close started off very strongly with the feeling of not having the mandate. And that's one of the concerns. I've narrowed down my 3 areas of focus to consider about mandate and how to get that. Concern about silos and centralisation, since our region is so complex, and the cost effectiveness concern, obviously. My question is around, because I like a lot of what you've presented, how to get that mandate, and maybe you've kind of covered it, but I'd like to just hear it as a direct answer, how you see that working to build that up.
As Doug said, you need to build a business case for this to see whether it will stack up. But I would expect as part of that process, you will be trying to build trust and trying to build collaboration. There's kind of 3 C's now in economic development, aside from the implementation one. We used to focus so much on comparative and competitive advantage. We now also focus on collaborative advantage. Regions that come together to make things happen do better.
I think just to add quickly, we've got to rebuild that trust through, going through a proper detailed business case process, and we see that as a collaborative approach with council. But you need to ensure that you've got the voice of the region. It's just critical to have that mandate. So again, we do go back to it's not. I think where the challenge we're at the moment is we're blaming the construct. We're saying the construct is a good model to explore forward, and it should be an option to be explored forward. The failures sat with how we funded and what we had within that construct. That's the key point of difference.
Thank you. Did you have more?
Sorry, I was just going to say, actually, and the way it was set up as a trust separate from the council, I think actually created the environment for you guys to say what's happening inside that black box. I'm not quite sure. You want to get rid of that. And that's why we're focused so hard on the alignment, the levels there.
Yeah, and if I could just comment back, I think personally that this council also hasn't lent in to economic development to the degree that it could, or even any of the social issues. Like we say we have an environmental performance committee, but we don't have an economic committee or those types of things. And so, there's, from the whole relationship, there's the two sides of that, and really want to acknowledge about the lack of sufficient funding to allow it to thrive. But at the same time, there's lots of parts to that. If I could just mention that those many strands and bringing it together, we obviously saw Te Waka trying very hard to get around the place and trying to do that. My question is how it can be done differently, or how it can be achieved in general. And I just want to put the call out to this council to really have a think about how we can provide leadership in that space, because there's some great ED teams around the place, and I think they can generate a hell of a lot of mandate. And I think that they are not well enough supported, and that's where option 3 obviously comes in, and that forum part. But I'm currently traveling around the region and getting to know some of these other councils, only to embarrassingly admit that I haven't been in some of their chambers, and I've been a councillor for 5 years. So I think there's something on the part of where the staff between councils and the Waikato work together as needs must, definitely, but the elected members don't enough. And I think that's something for us to reflect on, and something for us to have a think about how we would resource doing that, because when you want change, it comes set from the top, right? And so it's just part of what our solution could look like, is to help lead that change through that, to help reduce that complexity, because it's when it comes to the councils that, these personalities come in, right? And we could help manage that more.
We recognised early on that perhaps too much onus was on WRC for the funding and long-term sustainability of this organisation has to be shared by the region. And your point around getting around the region, I mean, I know that, for example, the people that in Lake Taupo District Council are doing some really good stuff around geothermal energy and that sort of thing. So some really nice little bits in there. But the kind of local focus, the local economic development stuff is all part of the bigger picture. And so there are times when you actually have to lift up to think about what's really important at a regional level. And it may be green energy, to which Taupo is part of the answer. So those things need to be incorporated in your approach. Yeah.
Just to clarify, so you said that one of the failures of the previous model is that the onus was too much on WRC for funding. Is that not what is being proposed here, though?
No, we think that the public-private partnership needs to come to the fore in terms of the funding of the organisation. As Doug said, the benefits will come back to the public sector and the private sector and iwi. So there's a model in there somewhere that we think is possible. So Councillor Hughes was correct that there was a large investment fund in Northland which primarily funded the regional development organisation. That said, though, all 4 councils now support it with funding. So, and that took a while. Building trust, building collaboration, working that up.
So that public-private partnership you're referring to, are you talking about that the public bit would be the rating that you're referring to, and the private bit is the business engagement? Or I just want to make sure I'm clear what you're proposing.
We don't want to provide an answer right now because, there's options in there. We had a whole list there of ways of funding this organisation, and we don't want to make that determination. But yes, in a nutshell, if you determine that a business rate was the best way of going about it, well, that's private sector contribution, is it not? So there may be an option for TLAs to contribute, WRC to contribute in whatever form. And then you would hope that central government would contribute as well. So the kind of nice mix there would be a third, a third, a third in my head.
Was that not the hope of Te Waka?
Yes.
This is different.
Just to be clear on that point, again, our view is if we go from a first principles basis on what is the optimal structure to put in place and being able to fund that structure, and we can't prove that we can fund it sustainably, you can't half fund it because we'll end up in the same situation. You might as well do nothing. You've got to be able to resolve the funding challenge to ensure success follows. And in principles, what we're talking about, and there are a number of optionalities under that, there's got to be a private business contribution that sits alongside local and central contributions.
And I suppose we see that in that graph that you put up that, for instance, Northland has got significant non-council funding.
But the funding can't be at risk from day one. We can't say, well, we could possibly get this. We've got to prove we've got the funding up front and it's sustainable. Otherwise, it jeopardizes the implementation.
Prove that you've got the private funding.
The total funding model from private and public.
All right, I've got Councillor Marr, Kneebone, Cookson, Clarkson, Strange. Marr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, guys, for your presentation. My question's around the use of the word infrastructure and just the meaning behind that. You touched on a regional infrastructure agency and perhaps use of fast-track legislation, etc. What do you see infrastructure as? Is it pipes, power, transport, people capability?
Really good question, because there's a lot of misconceptions around what infrastructure is or isn't. It's a smorgasbord of things. It's sports facilities, for example, the velodrome. We've now got the rugby stadiums that exist around, when the sports facilities exist around the region. It's the Waikato Theatre as infrastructure, community infrastructure. There is some pipes and those sort of, it's roads. There's a wide band of definition what sits under infrastructure, and but it's not, a lot of the perception is it's very narrow, that it is just roads. It does include, looking at power, for example, it's sustainable power development over time through greener approaches to that. So there's a very broad, and again, that's why the caution is here. If you don't put the right expertise who understands that dynamic as one key element, we'll come up short in the delivery and expectations around infrastructure.
Excellent. And just if you can help me understand how an organisation like this, council-controlled organisation, would feed back into WRC with our policy-making hat on and that sort of thing. Just how are you talking directly with government and saying, yes, like here's a project we'd like to fast-track, where council might be submitting on the same fast-track policies going, hang on, we want the government to slow down. It's just that. Yeah, David's probably here.
Yeah, this is why we want the forum. Exactly why. Because at that top level, you'll be looking at how these various strategies and approaches and priorities are ameliorated across the region. What's the most important bit? And you would hope that that forum may actually have conversations, say, with housing, as it's related to economic development and or infrastructure and so on. But you really want the lead for the organisation to come from the regional strategic direction and priorities. And that highest level is where you want that to happen. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Sorry, the mayoral forum I see the
rise of the mayoral forum.
Or the Waikato plan. All right, Councillor Kneebone.
Now, look, I had a bunch of questions about some of the funding models, but I think they've been answered. So I just wanted to offer a couple of comments. And one is this issue that we can't bind future councils. It's just the reality of the organisation we live in. But there have been, I don't know if precedent is the right word, but when I think of the late Taupo Protection Project where everyone agreed, all the parties agreed, and that was a 10-year funding period. I think the successive councils agreed to keep that rate going because there were one particular key funding partner there being central government and Taupo District Council, and it would have been a complete stuff up if any of those partners had pulled the pin, you know. But I think that probably goes back to the comment you made, Doug, at the beginning about we've got to socialise this. If we're to go down this track, we've got to socialise it properly and get everyone engaged and make sure we know what we're selling before we go out looking for funding. And that the other example of the surf lifesaving one was an example where the albeit very small, all of the councils agreed that the most logical way to fund it was through a regional rating mechanism. I'm not suggesting that the regional rating mechanism is the only one to fund this, but I suppose the only question I did have was, and I think Tauranga do it as well, levying businesses, that's the entity itself, i.e. Rito, for want of a better word, they actually, but I'm assuming it's still voluntary because they'd have to go through the Commodity Levies Act or something to...
They do it on a membership basis,
Right,
and they have levels of membership contributions.
Okay.
We're a member of, our Tauranga firm is a member of that.
Okay, yeah.
Now, there's some positives to that model, and we're not ruling that out either. The downside to that is you can choose not to be a member.
Yeah.
So that puts risk into the sustainable funding model.
Do you have any numbers on the different versions of EDAs around the country that do that, what their percentage of if recovery is the right word, but collection is? And so, for example, if there was, I don't know, 100 potential businesses that could contribute, what percentage on average tend to? Sense.
Voluntarily, you mean, by membership?
Yeah.
I don't have anything.
But it would be interesting to know that as part of the process going forward.
Noted, yeah.
It'll give us some sort of clarity if we were to go down that track.
Yeah, Councillor Nebo, and if you look around the world, there's a continuum between completely publicly sector funded and within public organisations such as a council or whatever it happens to be, right through to a completely private sector funded. And what you tend to see is slightly different foci. And those different organisations, Priority One, have done a really good job of actually bringing the public sector in to their vision and strategy and membership views of the world. Many, however, tend to be organisations that are set up for the benefit of the members. So the in public good part is less so.
Yeah. Okay.
Online, Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
That's good. Thanks to Dave and Doug. Yeah, I've enjoyed the presentation. I'm interested in the fact that you raised Kelvin's example of food and fibre. I'm familiar with what's going on there. And I guess I keep coming back to the issue that we confront, which is about a diverse region and the difficulties of, well, the impossibility of being all things to everyone. And you sort of slightly touched on it in some of your wording, I think, just before about priority setting, because also a mandate is also something you obtain through an agreement from a broad church of people to focus on something. And I think that's the other part of a mandate that possibly we haven't talked about. I'm interested in your thoughts on how we might land on such a priority, because I don't sort of see the Regional Economic Development Agency as being something that just progresses business as usual. It just focuses on things that are already happening, not on or even potentially not even on existing economic activity, which is being upscaled, but actually looks for that new development, that new thing that would be something that would truly add to the regional economy and the national economy. So I wondered if you could just comment on those ideas and where you see your model assisting in that process.
Again, very good question. Look, I think we see that as a critical part of the next steps, and our last slide, which talks about doing a full business case. We actually need to engage with and build, and firstly to build trust, but also get clear views around what are the critical needs of this organisation to be successful in terms of capability and expertise. And I think you've already got some insight into that from the survey results that you've held and shared today. I mean, they gave you, to be fair, that was 50% of that was for business perspective, so I acknowledge that. But again, they're a stakeholder group. They gave you the 4 key things that they thought were imperative to get right. So it's a matter of continuing that journey and engaging with other key stakeholder groups to confirm and build their profile, to prioritise the needs of the organisations to deliver the expected outcomes. That bottom-up approach is critical. Again, then you go back to what is it going to cost? How do we fund it?
And did you see the forum as being the place where that priority setting occurs, or?
Yeah, that's the question I was going to address with you, Councillor Clarkson. You notice in the second row down, the Rideau board charged with negotiating strategy, funding and scope. So that's a reflexive conversation that has to happen between the operational level and the high level governance level. So you're absolutely right. The food and fibre one, it's easy to say that food and fibre is our priority, but what in that? So you need to drill down harder as to what's actually being done in support of that regional priority. So yes, a negotiation process, especially around strategic and priority setting between the Rideau board and the forum. So you've got the top-down view and the bottom-up view coming together.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. That's great. Thanks for that.
Got it. Councillor Strange.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your presentation so far. Yeah. I had a couple of main points which have been answered already. My main concern is we heard a lot from Te Waka about those agencies and those people who are already doing economic development and duplication of efforts. We've also, you've mentioned the 30-year infrastructure plan and definition of infrastructure and what that might look like. We've also got the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, education training providers, so we've got a workforce. Where are they going to live? How are they going to get there? Recently, we've had our 30-year transport plan, which would have enabled a lot of people who live in outer regions, outer districts, to get to work, completely unfunded by the current government. So a 30-year infrastructure plan is great. However, if it's not bipartisan, if it's based on very narrow definitions of what people need, I would sort of see that as being unworkable. I think what our region needs is what we've canvassed already through Transport Committee, through Future Proof, through lots of other forums that we already have. Great work has been done so far through, as I said, the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, through the previous Waikato plan. I would possibly also challenge some of the assumptions around that we aren't a joint up region and that we don't have a joint up voice. I think it's too easy to say that. And we've heard about personalities perhaps previously, but my experience over the last couple of years, this triennium, is that we do want to work together. And so I would love for that narrative to change, that we don't have a common voice already. What we need to do is build on what we've done so far and change the narrative and say to the current government, yeah, we're ready. And I'm excited about where this might go, incorporating where we've already made investments as a council, where others have already continued the work that they have been doing. And we just really just need someone to bring it all together and actually harness what we've already got. So if, if somebody can do that, that would be amazing. I did have a detailed question, which would possibly be addressed through the business case. We see the graph about per capita spending in your presentation. What would be the ideal total operational budget that an EDA or whatever you're calling it? When I first saw it, I thought it said redo. And I thought, how many redos can we actually do, you know? But when you pronounced it redo, yeah, I think there might be a little bit of semantics around that. But yeah, ideally, well, maybe you could put it, what would be the ideal per capita spend through a local government portion, and then also for the total envelope as well.
David might have some views as well. My view on that is, you know, that is the work ahead to, because again, we're going from a bottom-up approach. Yeah. We've got to identify the structure that is to set it up for success, the cost of that structure. It'll be what it'll be based on our regional needs. And then, but then some cross-referencing or cross-checking against, well, what does that look like by way of a per capita spend? How does that sit against other regions? Will tell us if we've got that sort of bearing right, and saying, well, we think we've got the right model. Clearly, we've underthought this or overthought it because it sits well above or below other per capita spend. So I think it's a really important tool to pressure test some of our assumptions and costings that we'll do in the next phase, would do in the next phase of work in that business case.
Yeah, and I'm probably quite interested as well. You referenced priority 1, but my understanding that's not the whole Bay of Plenty region.
That's correct.
Is it? It's just Western Bay and Tauranga?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So, yeah, they do quite well for then such a small geographical area.
Above their weight, yeah.
Possibly less players as well. So, yeah, cool. But yeah, looking forward to where it might go.
To get a clearer view of what that collaboration looks like. The business leaders and civic leaders that we've engaged with so far are in favour of exploring this further, not in favour of having an in-house organisation within WRC trying to join those things together. The private sector does not see that that will work, and it's partly because of some of the issues that Karen brought up around in favour of a council-controlled organisation perspective. And we can explore that if you wish, but that's the message we're getting from business and civic leaders at the moment. We haven't heard anything contrary. So it's kind of like, do this or don't. Do it properly or don't.
And to that end, just to quickly add, we have got some letters, a letter of support to that effect, to look at this and do a full business case on this. They were equally effusive as this group is, that we're not looking to replicate what we've already had because it failed. We've got to learn from those failings and not blame. We've got to design this properly from a construct and what it's housed in, and then build it from the bottom up again, rebuild that trust. But we will leave these letters of support, just which really is supporting the idea of taking this forward and developing a full business case.
Adversarial there, because you know what this council does in terms of spatial planning, the transport committee, all those planning functions, regulatory, how you do those things well is absolutely fundamental to the success of anything else that happens. Also, you talked about different agencies doing different things at different levels, and that you could provide some leadership to put that together. In some area, or in most areas, regional promotion, for example, and visitor economy, alongside the work with innovation on Callaghan, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, all that business development work is in one place. I'm not saying that this is the answer, but that was kind of where we got to. You've got all parts of the answer here, but they're in siloed little entities that are actually all vulnerable themselves.
Sorry, did I just want to make sure I understood what you said. Are you saying that you would have heard from every business leader that this is the model they support?
So far, very strong support.
So the ones you've spoken to so far, can you, I mean, because obviously we've had a survey that had a number of business responses. Can you give me a feel
Yeah.
for?
I'll go one step back. My friend, Professor Greg Clark, Mr. City Regional Business Leader guy, he said to me once, the most important thing that you can have is civically minded business leaders in this game. And I would categorise the people that we've spoken to so far as that. Civically minded business leaders, plus also some civic leaders in there. Now that's the beginning.
Did we not
That's-
have civically minded business leaders behind Tawaka?
No, I think you did. Yes, absolutely, you did. I think it would have held out a lot of promise.
Yeah, just to add to David's point, in terms of, to Karen's point, we're not saying it's representative of the whole region. We just wanted to pressure test our report against some civically minded business leaders, organisation leaders, and that was in tertiary health and education and business. It was a very small representation, but we just wanted to make sure we understood where they saw the problems and what we were talking about to them. And we're saying that this is just the first leg of the journey. There's got to be a detailed business case to set this up for success and getting their support for taking that initiative forward.
All right, I've got Councillor Hodge, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Dunmore-Smith. Councillor Hodge.
Kia ora koutou. I've been sitting here trying to analyse what my thoughts are. So I'll be upfront and say that I wasn't a big fan of WRC funding criteria in the last lot. And the reasons being is I didn't see any value for anything outside Hamilton centric. And looking at your program here, I want to make sure that the difference between this and the last one is that they've taken more of Hamilton centric, because I'm rural, you know, we've got a lot of stuff happening in rural. We're already involved in social infrastructure, social procurement, which is something that's not quite explicit in your lot. And so I have to talk on behalf of the people in rural. When you go all the way up to Moko, all the way to Turangi, all of those areas, where is the regional development, economic development happening there? Because one, their social infrastructure, their social well-being is also low. And if you're talking about more jobs, more this, more that, you know, it's not quite happening there. So, and I don't see it in this project going forward. So I think something is better than nothing. Yeah, so I really would like to see how redo this new infrastructure that you are looking at does have a lot of benefit for rural, not just way out in the wops, but, you know, places like Tokoro, Tikwiti, Ochirahanga, things like that. Okay.
Look, I think it's a very good question, and I think it speaks to engaging but the basic premise is that this is a regional accretive voice which represents the whole region, not just perspectives, city-based or otherwise. It's got to take into account the whole needs of the region.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I know that's easy to say, harder to do, but this has got to create a very strong voice that brings the needs of the whole region together, not just parts of the region.
That's right.
That's part of the challenge we've had to date, because parts of the region have gone on quests of funding for infrastructure, which, and to be fair, I missed key points. That includes health organisations and schools. That's infrastructure. So
So just, as an example, for instance, you got tourism is a big thing. Maunga Tautari is struggling. It's struggling. And does that mean, can it come under the regional economic development somehow? I don't know. Just an example.
And
Can I just, sorry, Chair.
I'm just reminding councillors that what we're hearing now is one of the options. We do still need to hear about the other option. And so just reminding you of that if that influences any of your lines of questions. All right, I've got Councillor Dunbar-Smith, Councillor Marr, and Councillor Downard, and then I would like to wrap this up and we will take a break before we move on in the subject. Councillor
Yeah,
Dunbar-Smith.
just a very simple question, but it seems fundamental. You've come here with civic-minded leaders like Dallas funding this part so far. You now talk about a detailed business case. Are you expecting regional council to fund that, or is that something the private sector is going to do?
a very good question. We haven't got an absolute answer on that. We would certainly be looking to see how that could be funded. And no, there's no expectations. A short answer that we came here expecting council to fund that process.
And if you did expect council, I mean, how much would you be looking for the detailed business case, and when would it be completed by?
It's a very good question. Again, I'd summarise at a very high level and say the cost won't be insignificant, and the time with this complexity of stakeholder engagement would be a longer gestation period than other business case types that I've worked on before. I think it would be, hazarding a guess, you'd be wanting to block out sort of a 3 to 4 months sort of window to do the requisite work.
Right. Okay, so there'd be no decision if we went with that option, no decision until February, March next year, because there wouldn't be a business case. And yeah.
We need to understand some of the milestones that sit on the council side and work back from that as well. I mean, that's just, there's no impediments to the process.
February is the beginning of the annual plan process,
So we'd amplify the process to fit back in with council reporting and other needs.
It would be useful to know if you are asking for regional council funding, because that's a decision that we need to consider, or is the $100,000 we're looking at to go towards a business case if we go there? I mean, so it would be useful to clarify that today before we make a decision.
I think to clarify that, we would see this as a collaborative effort, business and council coming together. We'd be seeking some way that we could join forces in the funding of this process and the process itself, because that would give you a seat at the table around the scope and delivery of the project as well.
Ben's asked my question. Thank you.
Councillor Downard.
Yeah, thanks. I'd just like to follow on Katarina. As you well know, I'm right down on the edge of the Waikato region, Taupo, and we do spend a lot as a TA, the economical development. We struggle with housing down there, to get the people in. As you well know, there's over $1 billion being spent in the energy sector, and then also transport to get people from our smaller community settlements. So my biggest drive ever since I've been on Waikato Regional Council, which is only 2 years, has been trying to be affordable for the ratepayers. And we've heard from central government what our core responsibilities are, both in TAs and regional. So that's a big drive to me, is that I think there is a part for this, a certain part of it, but it's how much, the costing. That's my first, when I went through this paper and seen the 3 options, and it said like it hadn't had costing, but which option we go for then would do a costing for. But it's very hard when you don't have that costings there. I'm still very concerned about just what ratepayers can afford. In our region, we've got a lot of supers, people that are retiring, and now they struggle to pay. And I've mentioned this in the, many times, even through the long-term plan and the annual plan, they're really struggling to pay their rates and insurance and stuff like that. So
it's really important that we have the costings, and I know it's hard which option, we haven't even gone to the other option yet, but that's going to be a big driver for me. But economic development for our region, I think, is important because, as you say, you know, the population growth in the Tauranga, Hamilton and Auckland is huge, so it has to be addressed with the big part is Warren brought up is the infrastructure, you know, not only in the infrastructure, but have we got the people to do it?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I'm very passionate about housing myself. I chair the Habitat for Humanity Lower North Island region. I'm immersed fully into affordable housing and trying to get more housing and solutions in place in that spectrum. It's critical. It's fine to have good businesses, but if you can't house the people that are working in those businesses in an affordable way, there's not much point. So all of these things have got to fit together. And again, you've got more vulnerable communities in that space. So we've got this is why we need a conjoined view of the thing in terms of that planning for all the infrastructural needs, housing. And I'm a big advocate and supporter of the WHI, and we've played key roles within that as well. So, yeah, well taken.
I'm familiar with this, having worked for and with one of the poorest TLA districts in the country. And I think where they got to was that unless we have very real economic development to increase prosperity, we're just turning the dial.
Just keen to, I mean, it seems to me what I've heard is reference to funding as the challenge that Te Waka faced, and also I'm hearing that the challenge for the region is the one voice. With Te Waka as the regional economic development agency for the region, why was it not able to be that voice for the region? Any insight?
That comes down to mandate. And, you know, that I don't think you would.
How is the mandate of what you're proposing different from the mandate that
Forum
Te Waka
supported governance, good governance, joining those bits up, because I don't think they believed that they had the mandate to speak on behalf of the region, really. And I don't think you probably thought they did either, necessarily. But they were delivering some services for you. And from what I could see, they were doing that well. But the breadth and depth of what you really need for a region of this size, more than double Northland, in terms of population and other areas, is quite a different thing.
All right, councillors, we've been going for a fair while now, so I'm going to adjourn the meeting for 10 minutes, give us all a break. Then when we come back, we'll hear from Karen on the other option that's in front of us. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you, David. Thank you, Doug, for your presentation. Much appreciated.
Thank you.